up to 10 to 15% of breastfeeding moms can have low milk supply due to underlying causes. When I say underlying causes, I mean anything in the maternal body, such as anatomy, issues with anatomy, hormones, or metabolic health. This is low supply caused by biology. It's not because you're doing something wrong.
Motherhood is all-consuming.
Having babies, nursing, feeling the fear of loving someone that much.
And there's this baby on your chest, and boom, your entire life has changed.
It's a privilege of being your child's safest space and watching your heart walk around outside of your body.
The truth is, I can be having the best time being a mum 1 minute, and then the next I'm questioning all my life choices.
I'm Lo Mansfield, your host of the Lo and Behold podcast. Mama of 4 littles, former labor and postpartum RN, CLC, and your new best friend in the messy middle space of all the choices you are making in pregnancy, birth, and motherhood. If there is one thing I know after years of delivering babies at the bedside and then having and now raising those 4 of my own, it is that there is no such thing as a best way to do any of this. And we're leaning into that truth here. With a mix of real life and what the textbook says, expert insights, and practical applications, each week we're making our way towards stories that we participate in, stories that we are honest about, and stories that are ours. This is the Lo and Behold podcast. You guys, I am so excited to put today's guest in front of you because we are having a conversation about low milk supply, and it is a conversation that is not had enough, even though this is a concern, a worry, and a legitimate part of many, many breastfeeding relationships. I have Kaia with me here today. She is low supply mom on the social media platforms, online, all of those spaces. After her first child was born, Kaia was totally blindsided by low milk supply, particularly primary low milk supply. And you're going to hear more about what that means and why it was such a blindside. After exclusively pumping and then weaning early with that first baby, she set out to learn everything that she could about low milk supply from other specialists and the research and other lactation scientists. Since that point, she's gone on to become an international board certified lactation consultant herself. That's that IBCLC term that you might hear like online or on social media platforms. She's also gone on to have 2 more children. With both of those children, she has been able to maximize her milk supply for those babies and has had a breastfeeding relationship with both of them for 3+ years. So Kaia would tell you that she wants to help you discover your own success in breastfeeding, not because she knows how out of reach sometimes that success can feel, but more so because she knows how impactful it can be when you find the version of success that is right for the 2 of you. So glad to have you here with me today. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, kind of share whatever you want to share about yourself, and then we'll get into our conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. My name is Kaia Lacy, and I am online as Low Supply Mom. And I kind of got into that work just through my own experience, but my primary focus is helping families feed their babies with low milk supply or more creative ways when we have issues with lactation or bottle feeding, breast refusal. And so, yeah, I'm all about low milk supply, and I'm really excited to be here and chat with you about it.
Yeah, I love this conversation. And like, to be frank from the start, I never had low supply issues, though I've had supply issues, the ebb and flow of breastfeeding ways and isn't going on right now at different times. And so I'm trying to remember like why I found you or what made me look for someone like you online. But that is, I've connected with you first on Instagram, and I just feel like your resources on your Instagram account were so good for someone coming at it, just not having, I don't want to say I had no understanding of it, but you're just so good at explaining what it is, how it can happen, why it might happen, what to do about it. I just think that this is a quiet issue. And you showed me very quickly, like, this is happening to a lot more of us than is acknowledged or recognized, or even that research has recognized yet. And it didn't feel fearful. It just was like, hey, y'all, we have to be talking about this. Like, this is a real thing. And I know you dealt with it personally as well. So my guess is that's part of the story of ending up in this space. But I just think you do a really good job of educating and just that kind of classic, give this people the information so they can use it if they need to use it, right? Instead of kind of withholding it because we don't want to worry you or something like that. So specifically, I'll say the wrong thing, but give us some numbers of like how common low supply is, what this actually looks like, what we can be thinking about when we're pregnant, and considering this, this could be a part of my story, and what should I be thinking about it?
Yeah, for sure. And, it's really interesting when we have this discussion of low supply because the numbers and the data are actually kind of difficult to lay out just because so often low milk supply research is defined as perceived, right? So we'll hear about perceived low milk supply, which I feel like, in just like the real world, when we're not like going through ResearchGate, when we hear perceived low milk supply, we think, oh, that's someone who thinks they have low milk supply, but they don't. But so often, even in low milk supply research, because it's self-reported low supply, it's not confirmed as either perceived or not. And so there's a bulk of studies that, with low supply, we can't really ascertain too much from because it's perceived. But thankfully, in the last decade, there's been a lot more research that has looked at, the test weighing of infant intake and really gotten into the nitty gritty. And so we know now that about up to 10 to 15% of breastfeeding moms can have low milk supply due to underlying causes. And when I say underlying causes, I mean anything in the maternal body, such as anatomy, issues with anatomy, hormones, or metabolic health. And so those three, anatomy, hormones, metabolic health, which those last two kind of tie in, but I feel like it's easier to branch them out as three. Those can cause low milk supply in 10 to 15% of people, and that can be chronic, which means long term. And then there's primary low supply, which is that type that has to do with that underlying maternal cause. And then there's secondary low supply. And so we hear a lot about secondary low supply. Secondary low supply, we don't have the data for. We know that up to half of mothers worldwide report low milk supply. We can't confirm or dismiss whether it is a statistic that high. I would say that, we know that a lot of people don't have a good understanding, especially nowadays. I feel like it's gotten worse with social media, of what a quote unquote adequate supply would be, right? And so, I think it's fair to assume that within that 50%, there's definitely a number of parents that are probably making a really adequate amount of milk, but because they're on TikTok seeing like 10-ounce pours of pumps. They're
Sounds like a bar.
10-ounce
pours.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. 10-ounce pours there. So, but it's, one of the reasons why I think it's so important to talk about low supply is because we often will be confused as to whether we have it or not. And I feel like the dominant response is going to be like, you don't have low milk supply. Low supply is really rare. You just need to nurse. You just need to pump more. And when that's the default, we miss out on educating and supporting a lot of people that do genuinely have low milk supply and are struggling. And so that's just kind of, for now, it's 10 to 15% maternal cause. Secondary, we don't know, but we do know that it's higher. And that's those secondary issues, unlike the maternal causes. I'm also very long-winded, so this is just all my answers. So giddy up, buckle up.
Get ready, guys. I kind of am too, so that's great.
Okay, great. The secondary causes are caused by anything impacting milk transfer or milk draining efficiency. And by that, I mean, if baby has issues draining milk from the breast, if, we're told not to feed our baby more than every 4 hours and we're spacing feeds out, if we're sleeping long stretches overnight and not emptying the breast, anything that's getting in the way of efficiently getting that milk out can cause secondary low milk supply. And this is the type of low supply versus primary. Secondary is the type of low supply that's most malleable, right? So we can increase secondary low milk supply, but it's also, it's nuanced. And so, yeah, primary, secondary, 10 to 15%, and who knows, but more than that. So,
okay.
It's
10 to 15%, that number. And I feel like I remember looking at something, you mentioned like ResearchGate or whatever. This is years and years and years ago. And I swear I remember looking at something and it said, we estimate about 3 to 5% of women have low milk supply. And I remember thinking like, that's the number for a really long time. And I don't know if it was you or someone else who shared this 10 to 15% number. And I know there's more papers and things to back this up and support this now too. But I just remember seeing more of that 3 to 5%. And so I think naturally a lot of us are going to go, okay, probably not me, right? That's going to be a pretty small number. And so I think, like you said, it instantly makes us assume it won't be us, and or we just don't have any information if we do run into it, right?
Well,
so
and you know
like
what's funny about what's funny about that number is that, so Diana Kasser-Ull, she's the author of a book. She's an IBCLC, and she wrote this book called Finding Sufficiency about insufficient glandular tissue and low milk supply. And she looked into that number. And that
3
number,
to 5 or the 10
3
to
to
5,
5,
right?
the 3 to 5. Yeah. And what she found was there was a discussion in like the 20s or 30s. It may have been as late as like the 40s or 50s, but it's been a bit of time. And it was just this male doctor
like almost
threw out
100
that
years.
number. Yeah. This male doctor threw out that number, and then that number was just regurgitated, and it wasn't ever confirmed. And so it wasn't until 2016 when Penn State, Dr. Shannon Kelleher did a study, or published research rather, and it's within the biological underpinnings of lactation failure. Kind of a rude word, but it's okay. She's a wonderful woman, that she was able to present that number. And since
the
then,
10 to 15.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Which is so wild, because I mean, that's a really big difference. And from what I'm understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying 10 to 15 or so have like a primary cause low milk supply issue, right? Yeah. And then we have these secondary ones as well. And I mean, maybe you can clarify this a little bit better too. I know you were throwing out different causes. Maybe give everyone a list really quick, because what I want you guys all to hear again and reiterate this is that there's primary causes of low milk supply. And I'm going to let you just list them all again in a second. And then the secondary causes of low milk supply. So just go through those. Give us a list really quick, more or less, of each of those. And I want everyone to hear those so you can understand that maybe you have none of the primary causes, because a lot of times we know, or we will know with a subsequent baby. But these secondary ones can happen to any of us, right? Because some of them are related to baby, or some of them are related to what happened like in birth or something like that. And so lay those out for us really quick. Again, the primary causes and the secondary causes of low milk supply.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so hard, because I feel like when I have these conversations, I'm like, okay, I'm going to just like throw as much information at you as possible. And like, if you get 25%, you're going to know so much more about low supply.
You will, though. I mean, you will, because you just know more than you did 10 minutes ago. So that's great.
Yeah, it's exciting. But it definitely, if this feels a little heavy, it makes sense, because it's so nuanced, and we definitely don't get that message, and it's so important. But that aside, so primary low supply, again, we want to think back to the maternal causes that have to do with anatomy, metabolism, and hormones, right? So the most common things that can cause primary low supply are really anything that can impact your hormones, right? So thyroid dysfunction, if you have insulin resistance, which this is metabolic syndrome as well. If you have history of infertility, as luteal phase defect, which is low progesterone, can impact supply. If you have pituitary dysfunction, as it can impact your prolactin, which is so important. So when I give the list, I'm going to say the top three are always going to be insulin resistance, thyroid dysfunction, PCOS, because PCOS has an umbrella, which was just renamed. I think it's PMOS now. Did you hear about this?
I don't know if I know that. I'm going to Google it when we're done.
It's breaking news, actually.
I guess so. How did I miss that?
Within the last 24 hours, which someone said it's now.
That's funny.
Pissed me off syndrome, which I feel is accurate.
That works.
Yeah, but it's anything that, so PCOS, under the umbrella of PCOS, someone can experience thyroid dysfunction, insulin resistance, high androgens, which is why we see like the hirsutism and hair growth, and issues with fertility, right? And so beyond that, there's many. I don't have my list in front of me. I probably should. Do you want me to pull it up?
No, that's okay. I want them to kind of hear some of these bigger ones, knowing that there's more, and then hear that other side of the list too.
Okay.
So hear those laid out.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and so, with thyroid dysfunction, insulin resistance, PCOS symptoms, all of these that can impact hormones, they can cause primary low milk supply, because they can be impacting how your hormones are functioning now, how your cells are communicating now during lactation, but they can also impact your anatomy. And so all of these are kind of strung together, right? And so, for instance, if someone has insulin resistance during lactation, insulin plays this really crucial role on how your brain and your breast communicate. And if you have insulin resistance, you may have a slower refill rate. So your milk supply is low because it's slow. And so within 24 hours, you get a smaller output, right? But if you have insulin resistance and those symptoms occurred around puberty and adolescence or during pregnancy, this can also impact how your breast developed and your glandular tissue growth, and can cause insufficient glandular tissue, or a smaller amount of that lactation tissue, which now we have an anatomy influence as well, right? And so it's, with primary low supply, we want to look at hormones, we want to look at underlying health, but even we found that micronutrient deficiencies and anemia and high blood pressure, really anything that can impact your hormones can impact lactation, right?
Right.
On the secondary side, secondary low supply, I have seen it caused by many, many, many things. I'll say that the top three, if we had to list those, we'll say when an infant has issues with oral dysfunction. So this could be something like a tongue tie, a high palate, weak suck reflex, discoordinated kind of tongue function. And so baby struggles at the breast, right? And the biggest flags for these are, if somebody has pain when they're latching, or nipples are misshapen when baby comes off the breast. You feel breast fullness, but then breasts aren't softening too much during the feed, low weight gain with the baby. So oral dysfunction is a big one. The second is actually an incompatible pump or flange. Flange sizes are huge, because if we have a flange size that is oftentimes going to be too large, we're not going to be able to efficiently get that milk out of the breast, and that's going to lower supply. And then the third would really be spacing. So everybody's going to have their own unique amount of glandular tissue coming into postpartum, right? When we're on social media and we're seeing people that are like, here's a 20-ounce pumping session, those people are predisposed to oversupply. They have a huge volume of glandular tissue, right? We all have, it's a big spectrum, right? So when someone is coming into postpartum and they're more of like an average glandular tissue size, it's necessary to drain the breast pretty frequently, like every 2-3 hours in the day, a few hours at night, maybe 1 4-hour stretch early part of the night. Otherwise, our glandular tissue just cannot support sustaining the same speed of production to keep up an adequate milk supply. And so this kind of brings me to, with secondary and primary low milk supply, primary is very nuanced. There's so many different causes, and each of those causes can impact lactation in very specific ways. With secondary low milk supply, it's actually really interesting because there's so many different causes in a kind of on a surface level. But on a cellular level, there's one cause of secondary low milk supply, and this is inactive prolactin receptors. And so to get a little sciencey, because this is I love talking about this so much. I don't know why this isn't in all.
I know. I love that PDF that you built years ago that shows the receptors and what's going on. I love the science stuff too. Yeah. I'm talking about that PDF, and because I just think it's valuable to understand. Oh, ultimately, at the root of all of these possibilities, this is what's going on, which is what you can explain.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, so with the secondary low milk supply, at its core, all of it is caused by inactive prolactin receptors. And so what happens is, and this is always kind of hard when someone doesn't have a visual, so it's close your eyes wherever you are and you can kind of imagine. Right. But if you, think of the breast, and inside the breast we have you'll see all those illustrations of these blossoming trees, or blooming flowers, and that represents your glandular tissue, your alveolar tissue. These are all it's called alveoli. They're these teeny tiny cells. It's like the ones that are in your lungs, right? So you breathe in, they expand, then they contract. So this glandular tissue, if you were to pluck one of those off the tree and put it in front of you, let's enlarge it 7 billion times so we can see it. It's like the size of a basketball now. So inside this circle, inside it's got all these dots, right? And all of these dots are prolactin receptors. These are all your milk making cells. So they line the inside of the cell. And lactation is like, it's so much more than supply and demand. So
I know, it really is.
When you get the stimulation, your brain is going to send signals to those prolactin receptors, right? And when they get the signals, they'll say, okay, it's time to go to work. Let's start making milk. And so all these little dots start churning out in their milk factories, and they push the milk into the cell. And then when you're ready to nurse or pump, it comes out, right? With secondary low milk supply, some of these little dots that are lining our little circle here have turned off. And that's because of the most annoying thing in breastfeeding called the feedback inhibitor of lactation. So, or FIL for short, FIL. So the feedback inhibitor of lactation, I like to describe as your body's mechanism to make sure your breasts don't explode, because
it really is.
No, it is. It's like if you were continuously making milk all the time, like your alveoli would just burst. Those milk making cells would burst, right? And so the job of FIL is that it's this protein in the milk itself. And as those cells are filling with milk, this protein gets higher and higher and higher. And as it's getting higher, it's a stop sign for prolactin. So it's like this reversible blockade, right? So, when we're, especially in those early days, when we're feeding babies and we're having everyone will have that kind of engorgement, the reason it goes down is because of this FIL, right? It's also what causes secondary low milk supply, because when FIL is getting higher and higher as you're making more milk, your prolactin's going to get a little angry. You drain the milk out, and then we keep going. But if we have repeated episodes of that FIL being high, it doesn't just tell prolactin to cool their jets. It tells prolactin to stop coming to certain cells. So we don't just get slower milk supply, we actually get some of our milk making factories turn off, right? And so that's secondary low milk supply. It can happen with tongue ties. It can happen with NICU stays. It can happen with bad flange sizes. It can happen with, not emptying the breast overnight. At a cellular level, it means some of your receptors are not churning out milk. Some of your factories have turned off. And so increasing milk supply with secondary low supply means targeting those receptors. How do we target those receptors? By increasing prolactin, because that's what they respond to. How do we increase prolactin? The easiest way is with nipple stimulation and breast draining. In some countries, we use domperidone. In the US, there's Reglan, which I am not crazy about at all because of mood side effects. But anything that's going to increase prolactin, when we increase it to a point, it's going to inspire those factory workers to come back and open shop again. And that's how we increase supply. But this is also, it's wonderful that we have a great understanding of this. It's also frustrating for the primary low suppliers, because all low milk supply approach really does center secondary low supply. And so when you're looking at someone who has, insufficient glandular tissue or thyroid dysfunction or low prolactin, if we tell them, okay, well, we just need to increase your pumping or nursing, and that's going to increase your prolactin, your milk supply is going to get higher. Their issue is not these inactive prolactin receptors. Their issue is not that we don't have factory workers making milk. Their issue is that they have a specific underlying health condition that's impacting a specific role within that cell communication with lactation. Or, the anatomy is just with IGT, all your receptors can be on, and it's just woo, we're going wild, but we just don't have enough of those factories to make the amount of milk to exclusively breastfeed. You know what I mean?
Yes. So good. That's so much. Okay, quick pause for a second. I just want to talk to you about breastfeeding. If this is something you are really hoping works out for the two of you, but you are also kind of low-key wondering why so many moms say it was so much harder than expected, this is for you. I created the breastfeeding blueprint because I saw too many patients with a new baby on their chest and zero breastfeeding education to support the two of them in what was coming next. This is not something that you want to walk into without information, resources, and a place to go to when you hit those inevitable bumps in the road. Successful breastfeeding stories start before birth, and good education means you walk into those first hours, those early days, and all the weeks and months that you are wanting to follow, aware of what's normal, best steps, what's next, and how to handle challenges that might come your way. This course will help you understand your body, your baby's body, how the two of you work together, and what to do, look for, or change when things are just not right. Milk supply latching routines, pumping, sore nipples, clogged ducts, bottles, it's all in here and so much more. If you want clarity, confidence, and education and support that will stick with you and your baby through all of it, the Breastfeeding Blueprint is it. Head to thelabormama.com/breastfeeding. It's also linked in your show notes, and use the code podcast at checkout to save 20% and get started right now. All right, let's get you back to your episode. So primary causes often related to like the maternal body. This is really general, and I know there's the nuance that we talked about. These secondary causes, I'll say it's like often related to the baby. Like maybe they're draining you inefficiently. Maybe they have a tie, like it's not their fault. But again, it's this idea of like, it could be an unknown that after birth, we're like, oh, you're not great at draining me. Oh, this is I'm not positioning you well. So then you are not efficient at the breast, because we need to figure that out. But it's kind of something that we often learn later. Quick question. Yeah. I forget, when there's retained placenta, that's a secondary issue, right? If there were to be retained, because it's kind of this hormonal thing as well. So where do they put that when that happens? And so
technically we put that under primary, because when you have retained placenta, that's going to impact your prolactin, so hormones, right?
Right.
So really for primary and secondary, I say primary is underlying maternal causes, and secondary is anything to do with milk draining and efficiency of stimulation.
Right. So in research would be the other one. Yeah.
Yeah. So in research, this is one of the things that's super annoying is none of these scientists or lactation, nobody talks to each other. Right. And so we have 500 different names for all these things. Primary low supply and secondary low supply are kind of like, I think, the easiest ways to understand it.
I do too.
But we have, if you talk to someone who has a medicine background, they may categorize these as preglandular, glandular, and postglandular. So that would be, IGT would be the glandular, and then preglandular would be the hormones, postglandular would be secondary. And then we also have intrinsic and extrinsic low supply. And then we have, it's just guys, let's all just get on board. I would love that so much.
But
and I make people annoyed, I'm
thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I'm just I say primary and secondary because I think it's the easiest way to understand it.
I think that's the easiest way to understand it too. So that's the way that I've always oriented it in my brain. And I think it's easiest for our moms too, when they think, okay, like here's some things I actually already know about my body. Like I know that, and then here's some things that might come up and I can be aware of those. I just think that like delineation is really clear and really easy. The other thing that I mentioned to you when we started too is I think it's valuable for people to understand that sometimes you can have like a primary issue and a secondary issue, or maybe there's kind of like two different secondary issues going on at the same time. And so you've already kind of mentioned this, but this idea of a lot of support for you if you're finding that low supply is occurring for whatever reason is focused on those secondary issues. So like my thought process is there's like the best support is just going to be really good at figuring out what is causing that low supply, and is it potentially like multifactorial instead of just this like you need to pump more. And then if you're asking her about that supply and demand conversation. So actually you kind of mentioned this as well. Why does that, it's just supply and demand. Why do you feel like that's not super valuable in the low milk supply conversation? That kind of general concept.
I don't to be honest, I don't know that it's super
valuable in any conversation.
Well, listen,
kind of shallow,
we have the
right?
lucky ones. You know what? There are the lucky ones that baby comes out. Maybe it's a little uncomfortable in the beginning. We're learning each other's bodies, and then wonderful. Okay, well, it's just supply and demand now. Like I bring you here, you're happy, and then we just are in this kind of push and pull of when you feed, and that's just, it's going to demand that. And so, yes, in that way, for the average dyad who doesn't have any sort of speed bumps in the road whatsoever, which I find to be kind of rare, then yes, it can be as simple as supply and demand. And I've had, a bunch of friends who have had that experience, but I think that sometimes we shrink things down into like these very simplistic terms that honestly, like I would love if it was, lactation is supply and demand dot dot dot, because there's all these kind of asterisks that need to go with it. And with secondary low supply, you could even be approaching it like, oh, it's just supply and demand. I just need to like pump more and then I'm going to make more milk. But you have like 13 millimeter nipples and you're using a 21 millimeter flange, like that's actually not going to get that milk out efficiently and it's not going to increase your supply. So even though you're demanding more, supply is not going to grow, right? And I think that it's also, it's worth noting that low supply is not always cured. And that's one thing that always is so frustrating to me in conversation, because I feel like it's this, I'm just finally getting people to be like, okay, yeah, it exists. It's real. And the approach to it now is, okay, how do we fix it? How do we make it go away? We can definitely do things to support low supply depending on secondary, primary, right? But the reality is, for a lot of people, we're going to have chronic or long-term low supply of some sort, right? Even with secondary low supply. So research tells us that with secondary low supply, you have 100% likelihood of relactating. So what's interesting is increasing supply is actually technically relactating, turning on those receptors again, because it's the same thing, right? So you have 100% chance of increasing supply, but not everyone increases it to the extent where you can exclusively breastfeed. And so this means that especially if baby is over 6 weeks old, if mother is over 25, and depending on the duration that, supply has been lower, that can impact the likelihood of getting back up to that exclusively breastfeeding rate. If you fall within those categories, you have like an 80% chance of doing it, right? But there's also people that have secondary low supply where, maybe baby's like 2.5 months old, 3 months old, and, they're pulling out on the stops and it's just, they just can't get over the hump. And I want to honor that too, because that's a difficult experience. And I think it's one that we dismiss because we say it's just supply and demand. It's not. And so, like you said too, it's interesting because you can have primary and secondary low supply. I feel like a lot of times we want to say like, what is the cause, the one cause? And I can tell you in working with people, it's usually not one, right? It's usually, there's things that we can do as far as the secondary side to increase efficiency and breast draining, but then we also might have, underlying stuff going on here. And so supporting both of those simultaneously and having an open mind with it, right? And then also being, mindful of those expectations and seeing, okay, what is happening as we're trying to increase supply. So with secondary low supply, I will say there are timelines attached. It usually takes about 15 days to increase supply to that's like the most impactful time frame when you're trying to increase supply with secondary low supply. It can take up to 30 days. If you suspect that you might have secondary low supply, I always tell people like, okay, first I want to get you with someone who understands low supply so they can help identify those factors for you. Does it have to do with pumping? Does it have to do with how frequently feeds are happening? And we kind of tick those off the list. And then we come up with a plan for like, let's get you a trial timeline to try to target that secondary low supply. So once you have the right flange sizes, you understand like the frequency that you need to be feeding, you have all those patterns in place, right? We've optimized the latch, baby's doing well, there's no oral function issues. Then we say, okay, we're going to put these in play for 7 days. So I hear way too often about people that have been triple feeding for 5 weeks, 7 weeks, 2 months, just like, it makes me so
just unsustainable. It's crazy.
It blows my mind, because we know when we put these trial measures in place, if you are consistently and efficiently frequently draining the breast, we should see milk supply increase within 7 days. Generally, we'll see the first impacts in 3 to 5 days. If you get to 7 days and you don't see any increase, then it's worth looking at primary factors. After 7 days, some increase should be evident, and then it should continue. And then every few days, we kind of look like, okay, when are we hitting the ceiling here? It's around 2 weeks for a lot of people, can be up to 30 days. So long-winded answer there about secondary low supply. But yeah, I mean, this thing of like, let's fix it. We can all fix it. It's all curable is a hard one, because like for so many of us, it's like, ugh, now I just feel awful.
I just think it's so important to understand it's more than supply and demand for all of us, right? Because even going back to what you talked about, that feedback inhibitor of lactation, and when our breasts are really full, that actually then tells our body to stop making milk. Like there's these basic things that I think that we either don't understand or fall under this supply and demand umbrella. And it's like, oh, there's so much more here. And so like you mentioned, oh, well, if your flange size isn't right, and you're pumping more, maybe you're getting super full, but if you're not emptying it well, then that's actually going to not support the supply conversation at all, right?
Yeah.
Your actually body, at some point, these little factories are going to turn off, even though you're like, I'm pumping every hour. It's like, well, if it's not coming out well, it's actually going to hurt. You're stimulating your body, but the milk's not coming out. I just think there's all these there is so much nuance underneath the supply and demand conversation, whether or not we're talking about low supply. And so I just think that that's an important part of this conversation, like has to be acknowledged, whether that be this idea of, hey, if you have primary low supply, that supply and demand conversation is actually kind of annoying just in general, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't just pump more for glandular tissue that doesn't exist or whatever. Like it's not gonna work, right? And then for secondary supply, still understanding the nuance underneath, right? Of like, are you emptying well? Like, are we doing this efficiently? Because again, none of it is gonna help increase supply if all of that stuff isn't working well too. So I know you're saying like, oh, that was a long-winded answer, but I just think it is so valuable for us to understand what's going on here, or wait, I'm doing XYZ, the right things, and it's still not working. Like, there's typically another layer or a question to be asked. And then you think, okay, I'm super overwhelmed right now because everything these two just said, I'm not a CLC. I don't know what they're talking about. Well, that's where I would think a good professional can be really valuable, or a resource to say, you don't have to know everything about the feedback inhibitor of lactation. I hope you guys all understand a little more from just listening to this, but like that's what a lactation consultant should be able to help you understand, is some of those smaller things, or be able to support you. Like it is not your job. I just don't think it's everyone's job to understand the proteins and how those little cells work and all of that, right? Like that's someone else's passion or their entire life. But I love for you to be aware of it, if that makes sense, so that then if you were to encounter problems, it's just like, okay, I remember like there's a few systems going on here that could be impacting what's going on right now, and not just like, well, you need to latch your baby more and that's the problem. Like, rarely is that the only answer.
Yeah. And I will say, like, especially for secondary low milk supply, like, I'm not going to torture you when we're in consultations and be like, let's talk about the science here.
Right.
Because oftentimes it's like, okay, we're going to try some things. And, you know, if this doesn't work, let's talk a little bit more about this. But I will say, for someone who has primary low milk supply, it's interesting because I do hear a lot that going into the nitty gritty is very, very impactful for them, because we've spent oftentimes many weeks, if not months, not understanding why our bodies, quote unquote, don't work, right? So, because, you know, it's just so difficult when you're like, I am doing all the things right. Like I am pumping, I am nursing all the time. Like, I just don't know like what is happening. And oftentimes you're just going to be hearing about, you know, just keep trying, just keep going. And so for those people, I do find like it can be very relieving. It can be very cathartic. It can be like really difficult, but also affirming when we're like, hey, let's talk about what's happening within your body that doesn't have anything to do with your effort. It doesn't have anything to do with you wanting this. It doesn't have anything to do with you doing something wrong or right. Like, this is low supply caused by biology. It's not because you're doing something wrong. And that's just something that I find to be really impactful for a lot of people with primary low supply, because it's just like we've spent so long being like, I guess I just suck at this, you know?
So good. Episode 48 with Emily is like verbatim what you just said. So she reached out and said, can I come on your podcast? You know, I'll tell the birth story, but I want to talk about having low supply. And it turns out she has IGT, right? And it was like the way that you just described that idea of perhaps sometimes for that primary low supply person to be able to pinpoint a cause, to understand what's going on, to know that it's not about lack of effort or lack of learning or understanding. Like it was that's like all of the things that she shares inside of that episode when she's talking about it is like, this just wasn't out there for me. And so I spent all this time like what am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong? And really the conversation was like, oh no, like there's something for her in your body that's not available to you, right? You're not doing anything wrong. This is nothing to do with your effort. So it's kind of cool to hear you say that, like you are a great IBCLC, because that's exactly what this woman, if she'd been sitting in front of you, like would have needed to hear is this science and this reasoning that is not related to lack of effort on her part. So,
well, yeah.
it's so
And
good.
I mean, I'll tell you what, like, honestly, my work, like, I like to joke, like, it was just my trauma response, because when I had my first baby, I didn't know that I had IGT. I didn't know that exclusive breastfeeding was not going to be in the cards for us. And so I had a really, really bad experience breastfeeding my first child. And, you know, I think that like a lot of what I do is rooted in I want to give parents what I didn't have, because I know how negative the impacts were on me, and I have seen how positive the impacts can be when we help people early, when we get them the right information, when we're able to support them, right? And so, yeah, I mean, for me, like with IGT, I always will like throw it out anytime I'm talking. Like I always want people to be aware that signs of IGT include no breast growth in pregnancy or very, very minimal, and no breast growth postpartum. You know, with that sensation of a lot of us are told, you know, early, like maybe babies having to supplement in the hospital or supply issues are happening very early. And we just have this sensation of like, my milk's not quote unquote coming in. Like people are saying like, okay, the colostrum is going to transition to mature milk and then your breasts are going to get big and you're going to feel this engorgement. When you have IGT, that just never happened. Right. And so that's one of those things that I like to affirm, because a lot of times they'll say that and people will be like, that happened to me, you know? And so breast growth in pregnancy, breast growth postpartum, those are flags that you want to look at and kind of see, you know, is this something to do with anatomy? It can also be hormones too, but those are two big signs to be aware of.
It's kind of a good segue, because the last question I really wanted to ask you is, in theory, we could have just like scared a lot of people thinking, okay, there's 10,000 different reasons I might have low supply, right? And you're pregnant right now with this baby. So how would you say that people kind of prep and prepare? Like in my mind, I'm like, y'all just got so much more knowledge about the possibilities, and now you still step into this and, you know, you try to breastfeed and you have support and you see what happens. But how do you tell people to prepare? And I would say, let's say, give me two answers for first baby, where maybe you're not aware of prior supply issues that are going to reoccur based on what you learned. So first baby prep, and then second baby prep, if you did have a history of low supply and what that kind of looks like. What should those expectations be, or big picture advice for, we're going to acknowledge this stuff, but you're not going to end up terrified and worried about it every night while you wait for this baby to be born.
Well, for sure. And I think that honestly, like, I don't want this to be a scary conversation at all. I want this to be something that feels very empowering. And I think that a lot of us in the, you know, postpartum or lactation world are like scared to talk about low supply, because we're like, oh no, it's self-fulfilling. Like we're going to scare people into thinking they have it. But really what I find is like, when you talk about low supply, people that do have it are like, oh my God, this is happening. Like I can get support. Or people learn more about it and they're like, oh, I actually don't have it. And like, great, I feel good now, right? And so, you know, with people that are expecting and preparing, I would say that, you know, hopefully this conversation has relayed that lactation is so nuanced and it does very, very, very much deserve support. And it's something that like a prenatal lactation consult is so valuable and is accessible to a lot of people. If you're here in the States, insurance will cover lactation visits for most people. There are some insurances that are a little more annoying, and even telehealth consults, right? And so preparing in pregnancy is a great way, but also knowing that, you know, this can happen up to 10 to 15% of dyads. Secondary low supply, if you are well, you know, supported and you have the right information from very early on, it's not something that anyone's predisposed to. Right. With secondary low supply, a lot of times we will, you know, say for like second time moms, they'll be like, yeah, all these things happened. And then they get super prepared in pregnancy and they learn about all these things, or maybe they have a lactation consult in pregnancy. And secondary low supply, like there's no risk factor for, right? So just preparing, I think is best, but also knowing like, information, like you're not going to catch low supply from it, right? And so it's just a good thing to have on your radar, creating that safety net for postpartum and saying like, okay, if I have these concerns, if I'm seeing things like no breast growth in pregnancy, my breasts aren't changing postpartum, if baby's losing weight, if stool and urine diapers are low, if, these things happen, low supply is on my radar and I'm going to get support for that quickly. And I know who to go to. Right.
Yeah. It's like
So,
that cheesy knowledge is power, right? But there's a reason we say that, like having the knowledge then supports you and empowers you when you're actually in it, right? Be that breastfeeding, birth, or whatever we're talking about.
yeah. And then I would say, if somebody's had low supply previously, it can be really difficult when you're considering your next baby. And some of us are like, I'm never doing this again. This is terrible. I hate it. And, I will always honor somebody who's just like, nope, we're tapped out. We're gone. I'm like, great. Let's talk about bottle feeding. Let's talk. What do you want to do? But I also want to encourage you, especially if you may have had a primary cause. There are such amazing, empowering, beautiful ways to feed your baby with your body, even if you can't provide all of their nutrient requirements. And that's one thing that I find to be so healing for a lot of people. I found it healing for myself. I find it healing for a lot of clients I work with, is that for those, a prenatal consult is really impactful, but there are ways to continue to nurse, to feed at the breast, to extend breastfeeding. I mean, I breastfed my second baby till she was 3. I'm breastfeeding my toddler now. He's almost 3. And I never thought that would have been possible with insufficient glandular tissue and having to supplement more than half of his needs through the first year. But there are ways to maximize the supply that your body's capable of. There's a way to balance your mental health with milk production, so you're not just like a lactation machine. And there are ways to feel like you have a lot of autonomy and influence in what you're providing your baby. And I think that that's one thing to know, is that like, you don't have to chase ounces forever. You really can find sufficiency in what you do provide, because it's so valuable. And so long as, you're experiencing joy within that and bonding with your baby and feeling that benefit, then I'm just like, let's do it. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Okay. I've mentioned some things that I love from you, your Instagram account, obviously, but share with us, different ways that you can help people, whether that be right now or if they run into an issue later. What do you got for us?
Yeah, so I have my Instagram. And so on Low Supply Mom, I share a lot of just kind of general information about primary low supply and secondary low supply. And on my website, which is lowsupply.mom.com, I offer a few different services. Right now I have a prenatal course. I have consultations, which can be performed over telehealth, which is really amazing. And I also offer a weekly support group. So that's new. I'm doing that as of this month, actually.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And yeah, and then I have a blog there as well. But yeah, just Low Supply world over here.
Yeah, yeah. Low Supply Mom on like all the places and all the spaces, though, right? Website, blog, all the things. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Last question I always ask everyone: what is something in your life that is just bringing you a ton of joy right now?
Oh man, honestly, I think it's just like seeing my kids. Okay, I'll show you this. No one on the podcast can see it. My daughter just like drew this for me. But seeing my kids are like coming into this transitionary period where my 2.5-year-old is now becoming like no longer a baby. I've been in denial about it, but it's happening. And I feel like I've just come through the grieving process of that. And I'm now kind of arriving on that other side where I'm actually really excited about my little people now becoming like these little humans that are so sweet and funny and exciting. And so, yeah, so that's exciting for me that like my grieving baby, finishing that is like now transitioning to like, hey, we're all just like a wonderful, sweet family. And I get to like grow up and see you guys grow. And it's been great. It's been good.
Yeah. We're in similar stages, so that resonates with me for sure. Those of you just listening, she just shared one of those cute pictures where your kids draw the family with like the longer legs and the funny size proportion. It's just the sweetest. I love it. I have I would say 2 kids still in that stage of drawing family portraits like that. And they're just so cute. I love them so much.
They're ridiculous. It's like, a 6-year-old draws it and you're like, this is so endearing. But if it was like a 38-year-old man, you'd be like, this is terrifying.
Right. I know.
So
it's like you don't want them to stop, but you do because that's, skill and growth and all that. But it's so cute. I mean, you have to frame at least one of them or put it above somewhere because they're such a specific picture of that season of their life. Like there is a specific number of years where children draw themselves and their moms and their dads and their siblings and their aunts and uncles and they look like that. And it's just so cute. Okay, Kaia, thank you so much. I know this was like a lot of science, a lot of kind of information, I would say, for everyone. But man, like we said when we started, I just think this is so important. It is not talked about enough. And the more people who just are aware of it when they go into their births, like the better we're all going to be. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Lo and Behold podcast. I hope there was something for you in today's episode that made you think, made you laugh, or made you feel seen. For show notes and links to the resources, freebies, or discount codes mentioned in this episode, please head over to loandbeholdpodcast.com. If you aren't following along yet, make sure to tap subscribe or follow in your podcast app so we can keep hanging out together. And if you haven't heard it yet today, you're doing a really good job. A little reminder for you before you go. Opinions shared by guests of this show are their own and do not always reflect those of myself and the Labor Mama platform. Additionally, the information you hear on this podcast or that you receive via any linked resources should not be considered medical advice. Please see our full disclaimer at the link in your show notes.